International Media TV, television that listens to you.
Hi, I'm Johnnie Burrell. Welcome to the program.
Please join me in welcoming Mayor London Green to the stage. Thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome to San Francisco City Hall. Thank you, Vanessa, for that kind introduction. I'm honored to be here with so many people from around the world, so many mayors from so many different countries. This is going to be an amazing week in San Francisco. You know, many of us are here because we unfortunately know about a lack of leadership around climate change in Washington, D.C. That is why this week we are joining an unprecedented gathering of leaders from cities around the world to send the message that climate change is too important for us not to act. We are already seeing the impacts of global warming here in California and all over our planet. It poses significant threats to our most vulnerable communities and the critical infrastructure in so many of our cities. The decisions we make today, the partnerships we form, and the commitments we advance are critical to ensuring we leave our communities, our planet, a better place for the next generation. Yes, you can clap for that, because that's what this is all about. That's why it's so important for us to be here. And I am proud that San Francisco has been consistently on the forefront of advancing policies to help our environment combat climate change. We were the first city to offer curbside composting and ban single-use plastic bags. When I was on the Board of Supervisors, I helped push forward our Clean Power SF program, which has enrolled over 100,000 customers since 2016 and has resulted in greenhouse gas reductions equivalent to taking 17,000 cars off the road. Pretty amazing. Just a few years ago, I pushed legislation to enact the strictest styrofoam ban in the country and drug take-back policies, which have prevented over 40 tons of pharmaceuticals from going into our bay and landfill. Since 1990, we have reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by 30% and cut our landfill disposal in half, all while growing the economy of San Francisco by 111%. We have shown that you can be a sustainable city while maintaining a thriving economy. This week, San Francisco stands strong with the cities represented here today and so many from around the world to build upon the commitments made at the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris that was held in 2015. We are adopting new policies to meet our goals of being carbon neutral by 2050. And by the year 2030, we as a city have committed to 4 important goals: cutting our landfill waste in half, decarbonizing all new buildings, achieving 100% renewable energy, and we are well on our way, and continuing to issue more municipal green bonds for construction. As mayors, we are leading the effort to make our cities more sustainable. We can achieve this by working across our borders in global communities. Together, we have the ability to create cleaner and a more greener and sustainable future for generations to come. I'd like to thank C40 Cities for bringing us here and providing critical resources for cities like San Francisco to support climate initiatives. And also thank you to the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy for creating this international alliance so that we are all working together. We are thrilled to have you in our city, and we hope that you take advantage of the many restaurants and amazing places that we have to offer. And don't forget, continue to spend your money in those places as well. Our economy depends on it. And at this time, I am pleased to introduce the next speaker, a global climate leader, as well as the first woman mayor of Paris. Bienvenue à San Francisco, Mayor Anne Hidalgo from the city of Paris. San Francisco's amazing sister city.
Thank you.
Welcome, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, London. Thank you. Well, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, dear Mayor, dear friends. First of all, many thanks to Mayor Breed for her powerful words, her conviction, and her determination. One woman more in our network. I'm so happy. I'm so happy. C40 is extremely happy to welcome you as a new mayor in our network and to count on your experience as a long-time climate leader. Welcome to the C40. Many thanks for the city of San Francisco for hosting us in this beautiful historic venue. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank our partners at the Global Covenant of Mayors, without whom this event would not have been possible. I'm extremely glad to gather here with you on the eve of the Global Climate Action Summit. Since the summit was announced, it's been clear that this is the global climate milestone of 2018. Thank you for the organization. And this is true. Over the next 2 days, the Global Climate Action Summit will be an incredible platform to share our collective ambition on climate, and will open the way for all non-state actors to the next COP in Poland. I cannot share the detail today, but many new commitments that mayors, governors, and business leaders are taking to step up their ambition will be announced in this summit. These commitments are all necessary for climate-safe future. These include leading the transition to zero-emission vehicles, delivering zero-carbon buildings, transforming waste management into a circular economy, and developing robust climate action plans. C40's innovative Deadline 2020 program has been instrumental to push other cities and other networks to continue ambitious climate action and demonstrate how we can deliver on the Paris Agreement targets. Over the past 2 years, C40's main goal has been to enable every city to develop and implement climate action plans before the end of 2020. Mayors and city officials are at the forefront of this movement. Today, 16 mayors will be on stage to share their everyday efforts to get the job done and transform their cities into prosperous, livable, inclusive, healthy, and sustainable spaces. Today, we will discuss how we can develop innovative city planning to encourage walking and cycling, how we can ensure that climate policies help reduce inequality in our communities and address all segments of the population, including the most vulnerable, and how we can use bold climate action and innovation to create more just, healthy, and prosperous cities for everybody. This is the future. We mayor envision for our cities. The future is us. Major cities must be smarter than ever because they are facing difficulties on an unprecedented scale. We must think locally but act globally. Together with the region, businesses, researchers and investor cities, we know we can make the difference to enable the radical cultural and economic shift that the climate change demands. And we have to be radical. Now is the time to act. Every elected official must consider his or her duty to deliver a better and more prosperous world for our children, right? We are all in the same way. This is the sense that I give to the expression acting in the public interest, and I'm pretty sure I share it with my fellow mayors. Acting in the public interest means always siding with the truth. This is the truth about climate change today. It is real, it's happening, it's time. It's time to act now. Thank you, and have a very, very good day. Have a very good conversation. Cities are currently demonstrating that political courage and innovation can deliver the groundbreaking local solutions that we need for a global change. This is what our citizens expect from us. This is our responsibility. Congratulations for your action. Dear friends, I now leave you to enjoy the amazing list of speakers who will join us on stage today. Let's keep the good work and never stop pushing for a brighter and greener future for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne Hidalgo. What a fantastic way to start the program. Thank you, Mayor Hidalgo and Mayor Britt, for your amazing and inspiring works and for lead the way in this critical moment. Now, I would like to introduce the first panel of the day. In the past year, we have seen increased urgency to act on climate. Over a year ago, President Donald Trump announced his intentions to retire the United States out of the Paris Agreement, abandoning the federal government's role in leading the efforts to combat climate change. But since then, Americans have stepped up. Leaders of cities, states, and regions, CEOs and NGOs have pledged to take action with or without the federal government. Coalitions like Americans Pledge, led by C40 board president and former mayor of New York City, Mr. Michael Bloomberg, and the governor of California, Jerry Brown, bring together these private and public sector leaders to ensure the United States remains a leader. So let's meet a pretty fantastic group of American mayors that are leading the way on climate action. I'm pleased to welcome to the stage the panelists for our next session. The moderator will be Jamil Smith. He's the senior writer at the Rolling Stone. Eric Garcetti, the wonderful mayor of Los Angeles. Jenny Durkan, mayor of Seattle. Bill Perduto, mayor of Pittsburgh. And the wonderful Jackie Bykowski, mayor of Salt Lake City. Welcome.
All right. All right.
I'll sit down.
Thank you very much for being here today. Again, I'm
thank
Jamil
you.
Smith, political journalist and senior writer with Rolling Stone magazine. And I'm here for two reasons. One, when someone in my business gets the chance to talk to 4 mayors at once, you don't say no. And two, because I was born and raised in a city. I was born and raised in the city of Cleveland, Ohio, and I care about the future of cities. And I want to stop climate change. And I want to know how a person who's running a major metropolis confronts this problem. So without further ado, let's get started.
All right.
I want us to have a conversation, not an interview. So please jump in when you have a thought on any question. I'll address this first one to all of you. And I'll start with Mayor Garcetti. Then we'll skip around for the next 30 minutes. With the current lack of leadership on climate change at the national level, how are you working collaboratively at the local and regional levels to step up climate ambition and ensure that we meet the goals of the Paris Agreement?
Well, I'm glad you've noticed that nationally there's not much leadership recently. And what an honor it is, by the way, to be on this panel with my fellow mayors. And thank you to mayors from around the world that are here. And of course to Mayor Breed, thank you for hosting us, and Mayor Hidalgo for your leadership. You know, I've always said that a lot of people think that because the White House isn't producing much leadership, that all of a sudden the cities have to pick up the pace. While true, cities have always been where the action's at. And I bet that if 2016 had had a different outcome, we'd still be looking to cities in as big a way as we are right now to do the 3 main things that are causing emissions. 1, how we generate electricity, how these lights go on and we power our devices. 2, how we're comfortable in buildings, either at home or where we work, so our building standards. And 3, our transportation networks. And I would argue that 90% of that work really comes from local and regional governments and companies and institutions, regardless of who, in our country's case, is in the White House. So it's more important who's in this House than who's in the White House. But what did we do about a year ago when our president said he was going to withdraw from Paris? And by the way, let's all make a commitment to not say that we have withdrawn from Paris, because it isn't until 10 days after the next presidential election, coincidentally, when that gets set in motion. But his intention, instead of balling up in the corner and crying, with my fellow mayors, I had started a group called Climate Mayors, mayors of Houston and Philadelphia, and we started calling and saying, if he's not going to do it, why don't we take that pledge to implement Paris, to measure that, and to implement policies and share best practices. By the end of 2 days after he announced that, we had over 100 cities, and today I'm proud to report we have 407 cities who have said, if he's out, we're in. And they're in 47 states representing more than 70 million Americans. Anybody here from North Dakota, South Dakota, or Mississippi, please, we need some cities from those areas. But it's bipartisan, Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And I'm sure the mayors will tell some of the details of how we're doing this in cities. But all 3 of these mayors, myself, have made that pledge, that commitment, and I think it starts with that leadership.
Wonderful. I'd love the rest of the panel to respond to that question. How, again, are you working collaboratively at the local and regional levels to step up climate ambition and ensure that we meet the goals of the Paris Agreement?
Yeah, I'd be happy to take that on. In Salt Lake City, we had a unique opportunity when I first came into office in 2016, and that was a franchise agreement that had expired. And that created a window of opportunity for my team and I to really look at what we wanted to demand from our power company so that we could set a precedent and lead the way for other communities to follow us in Utah. Well, within 6 months, we had established an unprecedented agreement with Rocky Mountain Power. And that agreement allows for us to have a 5-year check-in window to make sure we're on track to 100% renewable energy by 2032 with an 80% carbon reduction. That has already been followed by 3 other communities in Utah who are now working with Rocky Mountain Power to do that exact same thing.
You know, I would say if there's a silver lining to this president, it is there is no ambiguity. He has not just walked away, he is undermining any environmental strategy, particularly climate. So it has instilled a sense of urgency among mayors. And I think you are seeing cities know that we cannot afford not to act, because as Mayor Garcetti has said, we have always acted as cities. That's where urban areas are, that's where progressivism comes from. But at this moment in time, there is no ambiguity about what's coming from Washington, D.C. And it has instilled a sense of urgency that if we don't act, it will be dire consequences. So I think if there is a silver lining, is it has made it clear that we in cities, together with our partners in the state, have to act to fill that void. And, you know, anyone who's been to Seattle, best city on the planet, it is the best. But we usually have, you know, our weather alternates between sunny, rainy, cloudy, but for a significant portion of our summer it just said smoky. And we had, for the month of August, our air quality was worse than Beijing. And it was worse than Beijing because we had smoke coming from wildfires both in Canada, in BC, and from eastern Washington. Those wildfires were in large part precipitated because of what's happened with climate change. And so we are affected, you know, we're a maritime, we have rising seas, we have depleted fisheries. You know, like everyone else, we know we've got to improve our building efficiency, we've got to improve how people mobility, and we've got to set the example and steal those best ideas from fellow mayors where we can, because we're all in this together.
Indeed, indeed. Mayor Peduto, do you have?
I'll be brief. You know, there's a finite level of carbon that we produce in providing services to the people we represent. So cities, it's a large level, but it is only a part of trying to figure out the larger solution for the area we represent. So it really comes down to partnerships. Cities have the ability to partner with other institutions in order to bring about seismic change. So early on in our administration, we wanted to look beyond the traditional power grid. Not how do we make the power grid more efficient, but how do we create a grid of microgrids within the city so that in Pittsburgh all of our energy is produced by coal or nuclear. And how can we find new options? Immediately opposed by the energy companies, viewed as competition, that we shouldn't be getting involved in this. But then the Swanson School of Engineering at the University of Pittsburgh said, we've been talking about this, and we have ideas how we can use direct current in order to make it even more efficient. So a traditional power plant that would provide 38% efficiency can be increased to nearly 90% efficiency, and less energy needs to be produced and used. And then we reached out, and the U.S. Department of Energy created a partnership with us, the first of its kind, where we are experimenting through a U.S. DOE facility in Western Pennsylvania on different levels of microgrid partnerships. This year, the Danish government reached out to us, and we created one of the first city-country partnerships, learning from places like Copenhagen and getting their engineers involved. And now the energy companies have partnered with us because they realize that their increased portfolio of not just producing natural gas but producing energy is something that will benefit them 40 years from now. In Duquesne Light, one of our largest electrical producers, just built their own microgrid, 100% solar, to power all their operations.
Wow. Well, on that note, Mayor Garcetti, I mean, Governor Brown just signed a bill mandating by 2045, California will rely 100% on clean electricity. Yep. To make that happen, what changes does Los Angeles city government need to make, and in terms of policy mainly, but also what do we, I live in Los Angeles, as Angelenos, have to do, you know, to change, to help you? Like, what do we have to change in our culture?
You know, the interesting thing about these deadlines, I've watched this now for a decade, when we stretch, all of a sudden people say there's no way we'll ever be able to get to that, and 2 or 3 years later it seems that it's not ambitious enough. And that's very encouraging, because as the technology and the political will changes, as Al Gore has been saying, you know, it's never been worse, but it's never been easier and cheaper. And, you know, that old poem that says, you know, our reach must exceed our grasp. We must keep reaching, because suddenly we are able to grasp these things. It fits into those 3 areas that I said. First of all, in Los Angeles, we own the largest municipally owned utility in the country. So we're going to 100% renewable power. What's different about us doing that than other cities where you can maybe try to purchase that on the marketplace is we actually have to take our infrastructure and completely change it. So if we can build more wind and more solar, we're the #1 solar city in America right now, but we're looking at wind in some of the western states. We still have to bring that, and then we have to store that. So some of you may have read in the New York Times, for instance, that we're looking at creating the largest battery in the world, essentially at Hoover Dam. Pump the water up when the sun is, or when the wind is blowing, and then when it's nighttime and it's not, use that to power our grid. It's the buildings that we talked about as well, and it, of course, is along our transportation network. And in Los Angeles, where we have the worst traffic and the most cars in America, we had voters who passed not just a temporary, but a permanent measure to build 15 rapid transit lines, the most in a single city in American history at a single moment, to be able to change the options that we have out there. And the last piece is we have to be thinking about interconnected cars. And I certainly, as mayor, I'm sure my fellow mayors feel the same way, want all the autonomous vehicles that are going to be in my city that are shared to be electric and to be zero emission, so that we can, as we did yesterday in Los Angeles, indicate to the marketplace by creating a collective of cities, we need more electric vehicles. We need more zero emission vehicles now, not just for cars, but also for our light duty trucks, our trash trucks, our buses, etc. And C40 has been a great help in that by taking the pledge, and I encourage cities to do it, that by 2025 you won't buy a bus that isn't electric.
So, I'll just open this up to the group. How have you dealt with those specific transit issues in your cities? Because everyone obviously has different needs. You get around Pittsburgh a lot differently than you get around in Seattle or Salt Lake City. How have you confronted that challenge?
I think we have to do it on all fronts. Is number one, we need mobility that's not cars. We need to electrify as quickly as we can, but we also have to make it easier for people to get out of their cars. So in Seattle, we're also underway. We have rapid transit now that we're building in the whole region. At the same time, we have to address environmental justice. And another thing, one of the things I was able to do as mayor is we just started a program where every high school student gets a free transit card. Every single one of them. And it opens up, it's the passport to Seattle, we say. Right. But it means they have a free, safe way to get around, and they get accustomed to it. Right. And pretty soon, transit is just what they do. And so if you can get kids doing that, they'll do it their whole lifetime. So I think it's not just building better transit, it's making it accessible. And if you get, every study shows, and we all know this, if you have transit going from where people are to where they want to get, they'll take it. And so we need buses, we need transit, and then we need cities that are welcoming to bikes and pedestrians. So if we do all of that, I think we can actually build those cities of the future that are better for the climate.
Indeed. Anybody else have a comment on that?
I would just say in Pittsburgh we have the double black diamond of roadways in American, and it was designed as a double grid system in 1753, and we never changed it. It sort of collides within each other, and then on top of that, in the 1950s urban renewal, we just built the roads bigger. So we are at the early cusp of looking at change, but what we're looking at is multimodal, as every other city is. Right. We're looking at creating streets that are designed for every purpose, but at the same time, we're adding a level of technology that will be available to everyone within the next 5 years. We have traffic signals that actually learn, traffic signals that use real-time data in order to be able to move congestion, much better than building more roadways or wider streets. This reduces emissions by 34%. And in areas of the city where we see rivers of carbon that are created by automobiles sitting and idling, we're able to reduce those areas and the amount of carbon in those areas. We're adding to that new sensors and the next development of sensor technology and building within it smart corridors so that the cars will be able to communicate with the traffic signals and be able to move traffic even better within the next 5 years. And if a city like Pittsburgh can do it with roadways that were basically planned out by Native Americans, then the French, then the British, I think cities throughout, especially in the West, will be able to even leapfrog that.
Mayor Biskupski, I want to ask you, what is it like being a mayor leading on climate in a state typically dominated by a largely denialist Republican Party?
Right.
Do you have any...
Well, let's just say it like it is. You know, Salt Lake City has always been a leader for change in the state of Utah. It is our role as a community, and we own that role. We appreciate that role, actually, and we rise up to the challenges that we face. We certainly are feeling climate change and have been discussing the real impacts of climate change in our city for a while now. And it's finally this year, in May, the governor actually was on record admitting there is climate change and it is happening. And that's a remarkable step forward for our state. But it also is creating a moment in time where all this work that we are doing as a city government finally has the eyes and ears of state government. And there's this window of opportunity that is presenting itself where cities who are following our lead in the state and are wanting 100% renewable energy and have to create access. We have to create that access. Well, we need the state legislature to do that work. And so this year we will be going to them to make sure the access is there and that we are able to move this ball forward. But we are in full partnership with some of the business community, but as well as our energy partner. And during the interim committee work that was done, we had almost unanimous support to move forward legislation this year.
Indeed.
Can I add one thing
By
on
all
the
means.
transit that I think is really critical? So we're fortunate in Seattle because we're building out a whole new regional transit system on rail. But if we combine our strategies, we can have so much more impact. So we just voted, I'm on the board, we just voted a month ago that around every one of our transit stops, we're going to have transit-oriented developments. So we're going to densify at the same time. So we'll build affordable housing and mixed-rate housing at those transit corridors. And then as we're planning out the future, like autonomous vehicles, we're thinking, okay, we know we're spending billions of dollars on fixed rail. If we make autonomous pods, we'll call them too easy. You know, I've got two sons. If it's a rainy Seattle day in November and they can walk the 6 blocks to either their bus or light rail, or they can call up their pod on their phone, they're going to call up their pod. And so as we're having autonomous vehicles come and we're electrifying, we also have to think, how are they going to work? What's our strategy to make sure they don't undermine the transit that we're building? So we have to do all of that together, I think.
You mentioned earlier, Jenny, the idea of environmental justice, and I want to ask you all about this.
Yeah.
You know, we've seen so many ways in which climate change not only changes how you do your jobs as politicians, but also works in concert with racial and class barriers that were there long before you took your jobs. I want to ask you, you know, how do you each work to make sure that everyone is protected, that these disproportionately, you know, this disproportionate damage that's done to certain communities is avoided or rectified?
Well, there's stuff on offense and defense. A lot of people don't know Los Angeles. You think of LA, you think of Hollywood. It actually was settled and grew because it was an oil town. The third largest oil field in America is underneath Los Angeles. There's a bigger one in Alaska, a bigger one in Texas, neither of which have cities on top of them, and then there's LA. And so we looked at environmental justice because we have literally oil wells that are in the backyards of people's homes where kids are getting asthma, all sorts of respiratory diseases. We have the Port of LA, which is responsible for 1 out of 50 jobs in America, but also is the #1 source of pollution. And that is traditionally in communities of color. Then flip side, we had all these great things we were doing, like #1 solar city in America, the biggest EV market, and more electric vehicles than any city in America, but they weren't going to the neighborhoods that most wanted them and needed them.
Right.
So we've put those things together with progressive leadership in the state of California to fund, for instance, our first electric vehicle car share is specifically in our poorest communities. And it's traditionally, poorest means also communities of color. So you have an option, if you don't have a car today, to become a member of our Blue EV program, swipe out a car, you don't have to pay for its upkeep, and it's an electric vehicle. We started installing and subsidizing solar installation for homeowners that were, you know, working class folks in South LA and East LA, traditionally communities of color, installed by veterans who need jobs, and putting it there so they could say, look, I've got electric power and my bill is coming down too. And then third, around the Port of Los Angeles, we took a pledge together with my brother, Mayor Robert Garcia of Long Beach, because we share one bay, 2 ports, and we said we will have a zero emissions port. 2 of them, the first in the world. And we've shown in 6 years an ability to reduce our pollution in some categories by 90%. So this work is absolutely possible, but you're right, you always have to look at who is this impacting the most. Global climate change, if you take that within a city, obviously as we were having discussions today, the mayor of Dhaka was saying it's the 10% of the wealthiest people in the world who are generating most of the emissions, and it's those of us in poorer areas who are feeling that impact. We have to do this globally, and we have to do it within cities.
Indeed, indeed. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that question? Yes.
Yeah, I think it is so critical, and I think we've all talked about it, and we know that if you look at where climate change has some of its first and most significant impacts, it's on those most disadvantaged. And you see it globally with famine and droughts, and you see it locally. In Seattle, we have a riverway called the Duwamish, which it runs through a community, primarily Hispanic now, has always been one of the most underserved areas of Seattle. The river's full of PCBs. It's a Superfund site. It's near highways, so there's pollution and asthma. It is one of those parts of the city that really was left behind. And so we have done a very concerted effort to help that community, not just to address the environmental concerns, but to lift those people up and provide more things for the community itself as a community, for jobs opportunity. I think the passes I talked about, those are a form of environmental justice to make sure everybody's got access to transit is critical. And then I think we also have to look proactively. For example, when we looked at electrifying our fleets and how we build out the infrastructure, you know, electric vehicles are great, but it could also create a divide because many people first can't afford the additional cost if they can afford a car at all, and they're not going to live somewhere where they have a charger. So we have to be very cognizant as we move to these more carbon neutral or carbon friendly policies. How do we make sure they don't harden the divide environmentally?
Yeah, I mean, Mayor Perdue, we were talking about Northview Heights and some of the areas in Pittsburgh where you're making improvements. You know, these neighborhoods that, you know, predominantly African Americans say, what are some initiatives that Pittsburgh is, you know, employing to make sure that those communities
Well,
are
let
served?
me answer this in a broad context because I have a very strong opinion about this. The Rust Belt didn't necessarily have to be lost in 2016. We just asked the wrong questions. And we put together ways to try to win majorities on issues that divided us instead of brought us together. In the city of Pittsburgh, in a community like Homewood, a young mother looks and she sees a new apartment building going up and she says, I'll never live there. She sees a great new restaurant opening and is like, I'll never take my family there. And she feels completely isolated about what the future of her neighborhood looks like, and she sees no part for her. 40 miles away in Connellsville, a retired mine worker looks around his town and he sees all this stuff happening. He hears about how the coal mine down the street is going to close and he sees the factory that's shut and he sees no future for him or his family. What we have to do as environmentalists is tie these issues together, especially in the areas that got left behind, in the mill towns of West Virginia, in eastern Ohio, in Michigan and in Pennsylvania. We have got to build an American Marshall Plan that invests in renewable energy. Instead of putting all of our time into fighting the fossil fuels, let's build out an investment in renewable energy that will re-employ people who build America, because you can't go to these areas and say your future is in coding. It's insulting. These are people who built this country, and we should tell them, yes, you're directly aligned with it, and you're going to build the next. You want to turn a coal miner into an environmentalist? Put a paycheck in his hand.
Nice.
Good job.
Well put. We unfortunately only have about 3 minutes left, so I've got to be quick and just ask all of you, and starting with Mayor Biskupski, you know, this is a discussion about the future and the world we want to leave for our children and future generations. What do you say to your young constituents who are concerned about the issue of climate change and are demanding action from you in government?
Well, the conversations I'm having are really in a united front. It's not so much the youth saying, what am I doing to make the world a better place? It is working with them. You know, there is a high percentage of youth who are very engaged in the issues of today in Salt Lake City, and they're empowered. their voices are at the table. You know, we have youth city government. Youth city government, I met with the mayor of youth city government. She took me around her city and was sharing with me, you know, how we have to make sure we do complete streets and how we have to ensure that there is access to all modes of transportation, that not everyone wants a car, that those days are over. That's not really where things are heading. So the dialogue with the youth in Salt Lake City is really, you know, guiding us as leaders. They're on Capitol Hill, you know, making it known that it's hard for them to breathe, that they're tired of seeing as many inhalers in their schools as lunchboxes. You know, those days are done for them, and they are in the room, and they are having the conversations on behalf of themselves, but also with leaders, and creating ideas and paths for us to move forward with.
Indeed. Anyone else on the panel to chime in on that?
Yeah, I think what I'd say first is I'm sorry, you know, and the second that I say is we're not done. We've got right now a moment to act, and we can do it individually, which has shown that it doesn't work, or we can do it collectively, which will work. And we have to make this issue a nonpartisan issue. This is an issue should bind us all together. And if we get away from the fights and talk about the facts and how we help and raise people up, I think that we can win this battle. I truly do. But we can only do it if everyone in this room and everyone they know decides this is a priority, we're going to make a difference.
Indeed, indeed.
And I just add one thing, which is young people, I would tell them, we're ready to follow. When you see gun violence, and it's young people who are leading the way, when you know the civil rights struggle, and it was young people leading the way, young people are better recyclers, young people don't use cars as much as us, young people want greener energy. Like, young people don't need to be told anything, we just need to actually listen to them, and I think we would save this earth.
That's right.
I think that's a good note to end on. Thank you very much. Fortunately, I could spend another half an hour talking to these folks, but we have to get going. Thank you all for attending this event, and thank you, of course, to Mayor Eric Garcetti of Los Angeles, Mayor Bill Peduto of Pittsburgh, PA, Mayor Jenny Durkin of Seattle, Washington, and Mayor Jackie Biskupski of Salt Lake City, Utah.
you.
And thank you.
Thank you. Jamil, right here. This guy.
Thank you to all our mayors for being such a great champions and protecting our planet, and also to Jamil Smith for that wonderful opening session. It's good to know that there is a great group of leaders that are working hard to make sure that our country is greener, cleaner, and safer for today and future generations. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce the next panel, a conversation with two women who know a thing or two about climate change. They also know a little bit about what it takes to build global consensus on the actions we need to take to deliver to the Paris Agreement. As the Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC from 2010 to 2016, Christiana Figueres oversaw the signing of the Paris Agreement in 2015. Laurence Tubiana was France's climate change ambassador and a special representative for COP21. It is fitting that the moderator of this discussion is another powerful woman. She is Audrey Cooper, editor-in-chief of the San Francisco Chronicle. She is the first woman to fill the role in the company's 152 years history. She is also the youngest woman ever named as a top editor in a major U.S. newspaper-based company. So please welcome to the stage Audrey Cooper, Christiana Figueres, Vice Chair of the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy and Governor of Mission 2020. Hello. And Laurence Tubiana, CEO of the European Climate Foundation.
Well, ladies, welcome back to the Bay Area. It's great to see you here. As key architects of the Paris Agreement, I think your perspectives here are really integral for everybody to hear today. And I want to start off with Christiana. Everything I read about you says you are
Everything you read about me is wrong.
Well, I hope not, because it says you are a very determined optimist. But there's a lot to be pessimistic about. We have hurricanes hurtling towards the East Coast right now, devastating wildfires in California, scientific studies that all the time seem to be more and more dire. A man in the White House right now that wants to pull out of the agreement that you helped to architect. So my question to you is, have we taken, since the Paris Agreement, 2 steps backwards for 1 step forward?
No.
What are you optimistic about?
So what did you call me, a determined optimist?
A determined optimist.
Right. So first of all, we have to correct that, okay?
Okay.
Because I call myself a stubborn optimist.
Okay.
Which is much better because it's completely irreverent. And why do I call myself that? First, because I have learned that optimism can never be, I mean, it could, but it's not very helpful, if optimism is the result of an achievement, because then what's the point? Optimism actually has to be the starting point and the input for any challenge. Because have you ever seen humanity face any challenge when we started with pessimism? No. Right? So you have to be able to believe and fervently understand, a true conviction that this is wrong, whatever it is that you're working on, and we're going to change it, and yes, we're going to make it possible. More than often, you don't exactly know how you're going to make it possible, but that is no excuse. And then that's where the stubbornness comes in, right? The stubbornness comes in by realizing that there are always challenges, there are always barriers, there are always problems, there are always unpremeditated events that happen, but that cannot paralyze us, particularly on something like climate change. Frankly, no election in any country, nothing can paralyze us, because we have to get to net zero by 2050. We don't have any other options. So I am such a stubborn optimist that I was listening to this fantastic panel that we had here before, right? Awesome panel. And I thought, wow, that's another line from my letter. So, you know, when Mr. Trump started doing what he did, when he got to the dark house, as I call it, because the lights are all out, I started writing a letter. Dear Mr. Trump, thank you very much, because despite you, all of this has been achieved during your presidency. And I'm going to write another line in that letter, okay? It's going to take me X number of years to write that letter. But did you hear these fantastic mayors? And they all said they feel an incredible resurgence of commitment to decarbonize their economies because of what is happening in the dark house. Now, that's fantastic, right? So that's where I get my optimism. I insist on finding something positive no matter what.
All right, good. Roz, are you as optimistic? And mostly, when you celebrated the Paris Agreement 3 years ago, did you think that of the 175 governments and institutions that signed on to it, that we would that we would have so much support and grassroots support from a local and government level? Was that part of what you thought was going to happen?
I think, and we worked a lot with Christiana on that, it was a plan. The plan was not to have only an agreement between governments, a piece of paper, just at government level, but it was really to create a movement that was with a clear common objective, and then many ways to achieve that objective. So Paris was, and I think for us, it was like we have separate channels, separate work stream, but all of them make Paris Agreement. So you have the agreement itself, but there was, of course, already the commitments of the cities, and already the commitments of the businesses, and already this conclusion, which was this low carbon economy is just underway. It's happening. And that is really the safety net of this agreement. You know, we anticipate there will be political cycle. That's why we fought so much to have a long-term agreement, not something that will end by 2030, but it was there to stay. And once it's there, it's a reference for everyone. And what was the magic? And again, I was probably not that optimistic when we learned from the US administration, but the movement of saying we are still in was just a fantastic demonstration, I think a massive innovation in the global governance, that whether a government in a particular political cycle, hopefully short, is saying, I don't want, but the citizens say, look, we delegate, a lot of citizens say, we delegate you our sovereignty to decide, but sometimes you know you're not right, so we continue. That's an innovation. And that's why when listening to C.T. Myers or the Jerry Brown early on, signing an MOU with a government of China, it's a new world. And in a way, I'm very happy that Paris represents that new world. It can, of course, tackle many other issues, pollution, oceans, water, whatever else, but that's a new world. This world is complicated, it's difficult, and sometimes, of course, I wake up not that optimistic, but anyway, we, as Christiana said, we are engaged, we can't go back. We have no other solution, but really the movement is there. So I'm really thinking that that was behind the Paris Agreement. We probably didn't anticipate that it was so necessary to have this, in a way, this million of ways to implement Paris, but it's happening. Again, it's not happening fast enough.
Well, you have an audience now full of your people. You ladies are a big deal, as we say in California. What do you think is one thing that all of the mayors in the room, all of the participants here, what is one thing when everybody flies home at the end of the week that you hope they do? You can name more than one. Too.
One thing.
But one
I'm going
is
through
good.
my list here. You know, I would say, am I allowed to?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. So I would think of it sort of in different time scales. One that I think is absolutely urgent and very ripe for harvesting, and another one that is going to take a little while longer. The immediate term is to pop the bubble of mystery around climate change and complexity around climate change. Climate change is so complicated, gigatons. What the heck is a gigaton? You know, and then there are all these dates, and I mean, who understands all of this? Climate change actually, particularly from a city perspective, can be boiled down to air pollution. It's as simple as that. And today, we have around the world, 9 out of 10 people are breathing bad air. 9 out of 10 people around the world. Now, by the time we do our job on that, which means cutting out fossil fuels and cutting down on crop burning mainly, a couple of other things, but those two mainly, by the time we get to the point where 10 out of 10 people are breathing clean air, we have actually addressed the roots of climate change. So, you know, we can say, okay, it's so complicated. No, it's not complicated, and you can't even see the CO2. Well, I can certainly see the lungs of these children, right? So, we have to get to the point of, frankly, public outrage about the fact that we are still breathing disgusting air. In London in 1850, they had something fantastic that was called the Great Stink, okay? The Great Stink didn't have anything to do with air pollution, it had to do with river pollution, because all the sewers were falling into the Thames. And they did a couple of things, and they put the curtains of the parliament into lime chloride, and they decided, okay, the effluent, we're going to take it somewhere else. Well, they did all of this stuff that did not solve the problem, until they called the engineers and they said, clean this up. Give us sewer systems that is going to clean it up. And they cleaned it up. Well, folks, we're into the great stink of this century. And the great stink of this century is the air pollution that we have produced by the burning of fossil fuels and croplands. So I think we have to get to the point where we have, before 2020, which is when countries come back to the table, we have to get to the point of having created a total public outrage about the fact that in this century we are still breathing disgusting air in every country. It is completely unacceptable. So that is my first, number one, urgent measure to really understand this and make it unacceptable to have air pollution. And my longer term, if I can have two, my longer term is investment into infrastructure, and particularly in cities, because it is very clear that we are going to have to build more. 60% of the infrastructure that we're going to need to support brothers and sisters who are coming onto this planet have not even been built yet. Huge opportunity to figure out how to build low carbon and high resilience. And the only way to get to that investment in that infrastructure that is going to support urbanization is actually to have very, very clear data and very clear measurements of the impacts of this built environment. And that is something that is already being done. But it then needs to be taken over to how are we going to finance that infrastructure. So outrage on air pollution, number one, and then infrastructure investment based on hard data.
What are the one or two things that you hope everybody comes back to their countries?
I can double down on the outrage, and the outrage can go as well on the energy poverty. There are millions of people who don't have a decent home because of course, of the inefficiency of the system. So, but I think, in addition to that, I think it's good that every mayor goes back to its city and begin together with the citizen of that city to discuss and imagine what the city would look like if it was net zero by 2050. Not a number, not an abstract number, but what the transport would look like, what kind of food and food diets, what kind of, in a way, the way to live and to live together, and begin to generate that discussion that, again, go from the abstract numbers of CO2 and others to what kind of cities we want to live in, which is compatible with our survivance as a species in the planet. And I think we need this vision. We are just too short-term. We don't know how to make the change. People are afraid of change. So that's why we need that discussion, that common understanding that change is not necessarily bad. There will be jobs, there will be changes, there will be transition, but let's imagine that together and not just be afraid of new regulation or new commitments or new things we don't know. So on one side, it's really good to speak about transformation, but on the other side, we have to ensure people that it's not a threat for them, it's an opportunity. And that's the job of politicians. So it's very clear, have a plan, discuss that plan, and make this an imagination that can be shared and implemented by your people.
All right, you all have your to-do lists now for what to do when you get back. Ladies, thank you so much for your leadership on this issue and for coming to San Francisco. I think we can all leave here now outraged, optimistic, and with a to-do list. All right.
All together.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What an amazing conversation. I think we can stay listening to them all day. As we just saw, powerful women were responsible for creating the Paris Agreement. And our panelists demonstrated that women will continue to be integral in ensuring this vision becomes a reality. Now, we will hear about a topic that impacts us all who live, work, and travel in and around the cities. Air pollution is a major threat to us all. According to the WHO, 18,000 people die each day due to air pollution, and 9 out of 10 people breathe air that contain high levels of pollutants. Creating greener and healthier communities by putting pedestrian and cyclists first is a key step in turning the tide on air pollution. Our next panelists and moderator have all different insights into what it takes to build a more walkable and bikeable cities. So please join me in welcoming to the stage moderator Debbie Rafael, director of the San Francisco Department of Environment, Frank Jensen, lone mayor of Copenhagen, and Juan Espada Cejas, mayor of Sevilla. Welcome.
Hello, and welcome to San Francisco. As Debbie Burrell, Director of the Department of Environment. I'm so pleased to be here along with Mayor Breed to welcome you and to talk about a subject that is near and dear to our hearts. In San Francisco, we are proud to say that we are a transit-first city. We have a goal of 80% of trips by sustainable modes getting people out of their cars. We're currently at 54%. We're very proud of that number, but we've got a ways to go. Thank you. And I'm excited today to be joined by two mayors, mayors of Copenhagen, mayors of Seville, that like San Francisco have a tremendous priority in their everyday work to think about how they create cities that are comfortable for people outside of cars, cities that aren't built for the car but built for the pedestrian and the cyclist. So please help me welcome the mayors of Copenhagen and Seville. So, and I have to say, I have some envy here sitting on the panel with these two mayors in their cities. So Mayor Jensen, Copenhagen is synonymous with bicycling excellence. When anybody talks about bicycling, they look at you with envy. So for those people who aren't Copenhagen, in early days, what kind of encouragement would you give them, and what do you think the most important things for us to do to start?
If you start to make a biking city, you started making safe to go by bike. Make it safe to separate the bicycle from the cars, take space from the cars and give it to the bicyclists. Because if it's not safe, the parents will not let their kids start by biking when they start school. No. So if you want to make a biking culture, a lifestyle as a biking city, you must invest in infrastructure and make it very safe, because the parents must be trusted that it is safe to go by bike when the kids starting biking.
Yeah, safety, that's absolutely true, and we'll come back to that issue because it's so critical. Mayor Espedas, Seville in just a few years has increased 11-fold its bicycling infrastructure. Amazing investment that you have made. What was the secret to your success?
Sevilla es una ciudad que ha tomado sus propias decisiones para transformar su realidad urbana en una ciudad más sana y más saludable. Reliable city. Para nosotros, lo fundamental era crear una cultura que hiciera que los ciudadanos dejaran su vehículo privado y optaran por una vida más sana, utilizando como medio de transporte la bicicleta. En muy pocos años hemos construido una red de 186 kilómetros de carril y hemos transformado la ciudad conectando mejor todos los barrios de la ciudad con el centro. Por tanto, además de construir una infraestructura e invertir, in addition of constructing an infrastructure, hemos generado una cultura de la salud y el deporte en una ciudad sostenible. We have generated a healthy environment in a city that's sustainable. Hoy, además, eso nos hace atractivo al turismo. So today, in addition to that, it makes us very attractive in tourism. Porque quienes nos visitan conocerán uno de los cascos históricos más grandes de Europa. Because those of you who visit us will know the enormous historic helmet that exists. Con todo una zona monumental declarada Patrimonio de la Humanidad de la UNESCO. With the whole monumental area declared a humanitarian patrimony. En donde solo hay espacio peatonal y bicicleta. And when there's only space for pedestrians and for bicycles.
Yes. That idea of creating culture with investment, a culture of bicycling, is critical. So culture and safety. And speaking of safety, In 2013, the World Health Organization did a global status report on safety, and what they discovered that an alarming 27% of the traffic deaths were actually among people walking and bicycling. The Swedes founded a movement called Vision Zero, and cities like San Francisco across the world have signed on to that ambitious goal of zero traffic deaths and avoidable accidents. We in San Francisco have invested tremendously in this effort, and I'm just curious, you mentioned, Mayor Jensen, that safety was that very first part of your work. So how is Copenhagen focused on safety, and what have you learned as you've tried to make sure that everyone can feel comfortable in bicycling or walking?
It's a question about separating bicyclists from the cars. Today we have more than 350 kilometers of separated bicycle lanes in Copenhagen, so that makes it safe to go by bike. But we have invested many money in infrastructure, but it's much, much cheaper for politicians and administrators in the city to invest in bicycle infrastructure and infrastructure for pedestrians than it is to invest in infrastructure for cars. Much, much cheaper. So we have invested around $18 million per year over the last decade, and that's why we have now 350 kilometers of separated bicycle lanes. We have bridges only for bicyclists and pedestrians over our harbor, and it makes it very easy and very comfortable to commute in the city on a bike or as a pedestrian.
Yeah. And in Seville, do you have an issue with safety? I don't know. And if so, what have you done to tackle it?
La bicicleta debe formar parte de una estrategia integral de movilidad en la que todos debemos tener claro que la prioridad es el peatón. En la pirámide el peatón debe sentirse seguro y para ello la bicicleta debe ir junto con una política de calmado de tráfico.
The bicycle needs to be adhere to a political policy
en las zonas más densamente pobladas,
in the areas that are less dense.
E igualmente, como en Copenhague, el carril bici debe ir segregado, diferenciado de la vía, en este caso de vehículos.
The auto lane needs to be totally separated from the bike lane.
Esto nos obliga a una conservación y una inversión muy importante.
This obligates us to a conservation, very important conservation.
Pero es fundamental ir reduciendo el espacio del vehículo privado.
But it's fundamental that we begin reducing the auto car space.
Y reduciendo su velocidad para, además, producir menos contaminación.
And reducing also their speed, so also to lower the contamination.
La estrategia es la calidad del aire y la salud de los ciudadanos.
The strategy is air quality and the citizens' health.
Y la bicicleta es el elemento transformador.
And the bicycle is the transformational element.
So what I'm hearing is that it's a shared responsibility for people to slow down, which is hard for us to do here in San Francisco, getting people to slow down. And it's also separation, keep the parties apart. Yes, so we have a lot of work cut out for us. So in San Francisco, we were lucky enough to partner with C40 on a study looking at gender relationships and bicycling in San Francisco. And what we discovered was that despite the fact that 49% of our population is female, only 29% of the people on bicycles in San Francisco are women. And so that got us thinking, what do we need to do differently? And of course, we look to other cities to get the answers. And Mayor Espedas, I understand that in Seville, you have a 35% women bicycling. And I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts about this gender gap? You are better than us, but you're not quite 50-50. How do you get more women on the road? or off their cars and onto bikes.
La ciudad, como otras cosas, en el pasado se ha concebido sin una visión de género.
Other stuff has not been conceived without a general issue.
El urbanismo y la política de movilidad puede favorecer
and the mobility policies can strengthen
la posibilidad de que las mujeres hagan más deporte,
the possibility that women do more sports,
y tengan y se sientan más seguras a la hora de utilizar este tipo de vehículos.
and have and feel safer when utilizing these type of vehicles.
El crecimiento del uso de la bicicleta y también de las instalaciones deportivas en la ciudad por parte de las mujeres,
The growth of the use of the cycle and also of the sporting annexes that are there should be used by women.
ha sido mucho mayor que el de los hombres.
It has been greater, the use of by women than by men.
Pero igualmente creemos que hay que practicar, como decía otra alcaldesa antes,
By the same way, we believe that we need to practice, like one of the former mayors said,
con iniciativas que cambien las prioridades, en este caso en los próximos años, en el transporte público.
with initiatives that change, in this case next year, the initiatives that change the transportation issues.
En Sevilla el transporte público es gratuito.
In Sevilla, the public transportation is free.
Para los niños hasta 12 años, niños
Children
hasta
up to
12 años
12 years old,
y los mayores de 65 años,
and people over 60 years old,
así como los desempleados.
as well as the unemployed.
Wow.
Si conseguimos una política que integre a las mujeres en el uso del espacio público en igualdad de oportunidades, habremos triunfado.
If we're able to integrate and put a policy in place where the women are integrated in all aspects, we will have better success.
Here's to that, yes. Now, the statistic for Copenhagen is fascinating. In Copenhagen, the statistic that I understand is 55% of the bicyclists are women. All right. What's the female split in Copenhagen, and how did you do it?
Because we have a very, very intelligent women in
There we
Copenhagen.
go, clearly.
I think that to transform your city to be a biking city, we have to start a place. In Copenhagen, in the 70s, car was also king in Copenhagen. So it took more than 20 years to transform the thinking of how to develop our city to be a biking city. Today, 61% of the Copenhageners use a bicycle for daily transportation. All kinds of people are biking. It's not only students or young people, elderly people as myself, we also bike, elderly people, and women. Of course, women bike, and it starts when you are a kid. They start when you start school. Your parents start biking with the kids to school, and then it be a lifestyle for you to continue biking. Safety comes first, also for women, because nobody wants to be injured when they go to school or when they go to work. So it's again a question about protection, make it safe to go by bike, and then all kind of people want to commute on a bike.
It's very good. So in closing, I would just be curious, what are you most proud of? You both have cities that are committed to walking and biking in your historical cores, in your networks, all throughout your cities. What are you most proud of in terms of your bicycling? We'll start with Seville.
Creo que de lo que un alcalde puede sentirse más orgulloso,
I believe that what a mayor can feel most proud of would be
no es de transformar la ciudad porque crees que debes hacerlo,
not of transforming a city because you think that you have to do it,
sino porque los ciudadanos y la cultura de una ciudad ha cambiado y tú debes estar a la altura de ese cambio.
but because citizens of a city have changed and you have to be up to its standards for its change.
Por tanto, trabajemos en cambiar la conciencia de los ciudadanos para ser parte de la solución al problema del cambio climático.
And so let's work together so that we can change the mentality of citizens and work towards something that's more livable.
Los ciudadanos que estén dispuestos a vivir una vida más sana,
The citizens need to be ready to live a life more healthy.
nos ayudarán seguramente a reducir las emisiones de gases de efecto
Will
invernadero.
definitely help in the reduction of emission gases.
Yes, it will.
Y los ciudadanos que separen sus residuos y nos ayuden en la economía circular estarán ayudando contra el cambio climático.
And that citizens separate their residuals, that will contribute to the maintaining of a clean environment.
Thank you.
Ahora bien, las autoridades, todas, debemos estar a la altura de los ciudadanos.
So all of the authorities here have to be up to standards with the citizens and
invertir en infraestructuras y poder financiarlas
and be able to finance them
con un gran acuerdo de los gobiernos.
with an overall agreement of the governments.
Yes.
Las ciudades necesitamos cumplir los acuerdos con planes de acción que puedan financiarse
Cities need to comply with agreements that could be financed
entre la iniciativa privada y la iniciativa pública.
between the private initiative and the public initiative.
Wonderful. Thank you.
The future is us.
The future is us. And what is Copenhagen most proud of?
I'm most proud of the political commitment, the leadership, to continue making plans, new plans for more bicycle lanes, not only in the inner city, but also super highways for bicycle from the suburbs to the inner city. And that my colleagues in the other municipalities want to be a part of this bicycling culture. Because we can, as a mayor in the Copenhagen city, we can make a lot of investment in the inner city, but we are also depend on that the mayors in the suburbs want to be a part of it, so that the congestion can decrease from cars from the suburbs to the inner city, and then we can make super highways for bicyclists to the inner city of Copenhagen. So that the political leadership, it needs political leadership to change your city to be a biking city.
Wow. Political will, citizen engagement, healthy, safe streets for bicyclists and walking. That is something we can all aspire to. Thank you for your inspiration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Thank you, Mayor Espadas and Lord Mayor Jensen, for that exciting discussion. To see everything that they have been able to accomplish in sustainable transportation, it is truly inspiring. Our next panel focuses on what it takes to build an equitable society. Cities are increasingly at the center of rising inequality and socioeconomic disparities that have deep disruptive consequences to city resilience and development, such as rising civil unrest, limited capacity to respond to shock and stresses, and unequal access to local services. The concept of inclusive climate actions aims to address many of these urban problems at once. Inclusive climate actions tackle multiple priorities simultaneously, deliver multiple benefits to all segments of the population, and ultimately result on transformational solutions. So let's hear it from our panel about their vision of a more inclusive and resilient future. Welcome to the stage our moderator, Mr. Gregor Robertson, Mayor of Vancouver, Wong Kan Singh, Secretary of the Environment on Hong Kong, China, and also Raymond Johansen, Governing Mayor of Oslo. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Wonderful to be joining you all here in beautiful San Francisco, the city by the bay, from three different continents here. And we are here to talk about equity and connect the dots between our really critical work on climate change and the work that we do on equity and making sure all of our residents have equal opportunities. And in particular, the most vulnerable in our cities are not adversely affected, but actually with the changes that we make and the ideas we put into reality, that we are addressing equity alongside the changes we make on climate and environment. So the benefits of climate action are huge. We know taking action is essential to what we do in cities as mayors and our teams, that the changes that we are going to make will result in healthier and happier lives, cleaner air and water, very direct positive impacts in our cities. We have to make sure that this is not just an environmental issue. We have to make sure that it is carefully linked to the challenges of eradicating poverty, addressing affordability challenges, and reducing inequality in our cities. And for big cities like Vancouver, Hong Kong, Oslo, as 3 examples, affordability is front and center. For us in elected office, it's often the biggest pressure point as our cities grow and are successful economically, but we face enormous pressure on those who are having a tough time competing. So we see big opportunities as we tackle climate change to also tackle equity and address those solutions. We're seeing that improving equity for our citizens does drive better environmental outcomes. We see very disruptive impacts resulting if you don't address equity issues. The resilience of the city is threatened directly. And in our work, as well as resilient cities, we also put the community impacts right in the center of that, making sure that we're responding to the stresses and the shocks that we face in city, not just the immediate ones that we may face in Vancouver's case, like earthquakes, which is also a constant threat for San Francisco, this area, in the Bay Area, but the longer term strains and affordability, equity is one of those that is over time very disruptive and high impact in our cities. So we're going to talk a little bit today about what we're doing in our cities to address these bigger issues around equity and connect the dots between our climate action and the ways that we can address inequality in our city. So I'm joined here, we had brief introductions, and I'm not going to go into further introductions. These gentlemen both play key roles. First, Kam Sing Wong in Hong Kong is the Secretary of Environment, and the governing mayor of Oslo as well, Raymond Johansen. So these 2 gentlemen, I think, bring very different cities from each other. We all come from unique cities, and we obviously compare notes and copy each other's at every opportunity. When there are good ideas, they're back and forth. But I'll start with a question for Secretary Wong. In terms of affordability, challenges with equity, when you have a very constrained land base, and Hong Kong is probably the most constrained land base in the world in terms of what you have available for development and population pressure. Can you connect the dots in terms of your work on land use and getting more efficiency and density in your city with both climate and equity for your residents?
Okay, thank you for the questions. I think many people would like to say, look to Vancouver, because Vancouver is recognized as one of the most livable cities in the world. Certainly, it depends on different assessment criteria. And Hong Kong was also recognized as one of the most livable cities in the world. You may wonder how Hong Kong may be compared to Vancouver, right? Certainly, we do want to have the livability, healthy environment for not only the richer people, but also for everyone. According to that assessment that recognized Hong Kong as the most livable city in the world, is because Hong Kong is highly urbanized. At the same time, not so urbanized, because we just have urbanized about a quarter of our territory, even though Hong Kong's territory is small. Leaving about more than 70% of our land belong to the rural area and country parks. And our country parks accounting for about 40% of our land. And not only that, it's very accessible. People can go to the country park on foot and also by public means of transportation. That means it could be enjoyed by everyone, no matter they are rich and not so rich. Number one. Secondly, I think the previous speakers talked about mobility, sustainable mobility. In Hong Kong, the current data is that the public means of transportation serving the daily commuting is more than 90%. In Hong Kong, we have 7 million population, and the daily public commutings are accounting for about over 12 million per day, using transit buses. So it's affordable, sustainable, and environmentally friendly. So most people, even though they are richer people, they would not use their own car, but use public means of transportation between work and home. And lastly, about housing. In Hong Kong, it's so dense. So it really depends on the urban design and architectural design to ensure that the high-density compact urban form can be designed in an environmentally friendly way. In Hong Kong, about half of the population are living in public housing. So we have a policy by our housing department. They commit to having all the new public housing to meet the local green building certification level, either the highest or the second highest. That means platinum or gold, equivalent to the LEED, platinum or gold here. It's affordable housing because those people would like to have better electrical ventilation, daylighting, so that they can live comfortably, healthily, without much dependence on space cooling, save their money, and keep them healthy. So in short, we like to make them happy, healthier. So we have 40% country parks, and we would further increase the country parks coverage in the coming years. Secondly, affordable and sustainable mobility. Last but not least, affordable and green housing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Mayor Johansson, maybe shifting over to Oslo, which has been one of the greenest cities in the world for many years, very aggressive and ambitious work on clean transportation. I'd like you to talk a little about how you were able to push such an intense pace in dealing with climate action. At the same time, you're facing affordability pressures, and those on lowest incomes are struggling to make it in the city. How do you engage people on lower incomes in climate action? How do you engage the broader community in terms of balancing equity and climate?
Thank you, Greg, for an important question. I think for us as politicians, the most important thing is to facilitate for people making the right actions. For example, public transport is essential. When people wake up in the morning, I don't think they think, well, today I have to choose an environmental friendly solution, so I want to use 1 hour extra going to my work. So it means that it should be easier and better to use the public transport. Therefore, to strengthen and to make it cheaper, accessible for everyone. So it's about easing and making life easier by building new bicycle lanes, easier to walk, and also to open the seafront, open the inner city of the people. Now we have ambitions within 2019 that the inner city of Oslo shall be free of cars. So it's about how people in their daily life will be a part of the environmental friendly solutions, and that we have to facilitate for that. Secondly, I think it's extremely important also to involve people. When we made our general plan, the management plan for the whole city, we sent out 500,000 SMS to all the people in Oslo older than 18 years. We send our plan and our proposals, and for receiving comments and new proposals. Of course, sometimes I really regret that. For the first time, ordinary people, they really realized the content in our proposals. So they were not that happy with all of them, but it gave us the possibility also to trying to explain, although not everyone was happy about it, and to adjust the plan.
Right.
So I think to take people seriously, and also people are elsewhere than they used to be.
No, they are on other platforms. So we have established the Facebook and be very responsive because people are elsewhere and know they are on the social media to take that seriously. And people, they really expect you to immediate answer on the questions. So we have strengthened the direct contact with the people. And that is some of the measures. But the one thing I want to highlight is that we need to facilitate, and that the politics is important, and politicians we can't. Therefore, I see when the market is totally deregulated, and in many cities you find it extremely difficult to do anything because it's other forces that really are in the driver's seat, not the politicians. So, but that's about which line politically you want to use.
Right. And in terms of hearing the voices, I mean, I think it's always easier for those who have resources and access to have their opinions heard louder. For the more vulnerable citizens in our cities, it can be difficult just to get by, much less to give feedback to our city halls and make sure their voices are heard. So what do you do specifically for those who are at greatest risk and those where the equity issues are most challenging? How do you hear those people? Make sure that their voices, if they don't get the text message from City Hall.
It's an important question, and it's difficult because we also see, and I think mostly cities, especially in Europe and maybe also in Canada, the people who lives in the inner cities of the cities, they see big advantage of the green shift because the air is better and they are very strong supporter of our politics. But people lives in the outskirts and in the suburbia, they really see it more difficult. So therefore, at the same time, when we do our restrictions, make it more difficult to park and more expensive to drive, then we need to improve the public transport system at the same time. And to communicate with that, because often people which are less rich, they're living often in the outskirts. So we have tried to find the right balance between the carrot and the sticks, and to communicate that it will be, in the end of the day, when you have an efficient public transport system, for example, then it will also ease the life for people who lives in the outskirts, which not will be in a heavy traffic for hours, just an example.
Right. And maybe in the Hong Kong case, Secretary, you mentioned the challenges on housing or the opportunities. I know in a number of our cities, affordable housing is maybe the biggest challenge that we face. I think in our cities it certainly is. And the investment in homes to make them more energy efficient it can get held up as a barrier. So we just need to build anything so people have a place to live, versus we need to invest in the long term in the most energy efficient buildings we can. And can you speak to how Hong Kong is addressing that, energy efficient for climate, making sure that people of all incomes have access to that housing?
Yeah, I said earlier that about half of the populations in Hong Kong are living in the public housing or affordable housing. Half. Okay, every two families, one in the subsidized housing. So the government has a very important role to ensure that those public housing opportunities could be optimized. As you said, the climate mitigations, adaptations are very important. So we have the policy is that when the housing department built the public housing, actually there's a forthcoming very massive scale public housing in Hong Kong. So we like to seize the opportunity to ensure that all this public housing, they are built to be green. As that, we like to make them energy efficient, naturally ventilated, daylight, etc., so that it could be enjoyed in a healthy way, environmental friendly way, at the same time to reduce their burden on the, say, power tariff, etc. So, and also they have to meet the second or the highest level of green building certification in Hong Kong.
Oh, really?
So I would like to demonstrate that green building is not just for the richer people, but also for the grassroots people. So when they enjoy the public housing, they can ensure that their homes will be affordable and sustainable.
And do you have a similar approach in Oslo with public housing? make it most energy efficient?
Yes, definitely, but we are not in our public houses, of course, but it's more market regulated, the housing, and I think we really can learn a lot from Vancouver and what you have done also when it's come to more energy efficiency when it's in the housing. So we have not done that much yet, but we are just about to have a new program on that.
Right. Yeah, in Vancouver, we have a zero emission building requirement by 2030. 100% of buildings must be zero emissions, 90% by 2025. And that does include the public housing, affordable housing. But in our analysis, when we do life cycle analysis of our buildings, we save money by going to the highest green standards. And the capital at the front end is more than offset by the savings in energy. So I think we've made the business case. We're willing to make that investment and make sure no matter what income people are on, they're living in green buildings and healthy buildings.
Very impressive.
So a question, and in Hong Kong, I know there's your policy around the landslip prevention and mitigation. You have heavy rains, even more extreme weather events, and you've made the climate investment to stabilize your hillsides, but that obviously has a benefit for communities that are maybe lower income communities, people that otherwise wouldn't be protected.
Yeah, it's a very good question. In fact, Hong Kong today is being attacked by a typhoon, and the forthcoming one would be coming during this weekend. Probably would be one of the strongest ever typhoon attacking Hong Kong.
Directly?
Directly, most likely, and it would affect my return flight. Okay, anyway, Hong Kong did learn from the past experience because decades ago, there are strong typhoons, heavy rainfalls, and Hong Kong is the urbanized areas are next to these very steep hillside. So the landslide did cause problems, and there were bitter stories decades ago. But starting probably around 4 decades ago, we have a very comprehensive plan to tackle the problem. So I think this story is not only for Hong Kong, but also for other cities when we plan how we can make our city more climate adaptive in the long run.
Yes.
It's massive because Hong Kong is a hilly city, so there are many, many slopes. So our plan is to set aside a pretty steady fund, public fund, to work on about 100 to 200 slopes per year. In this way, we can keep a team of skilled labor and engineers work on this very important subject. Secondly, we would like to look for solutions that can be more sustainable. For instance, for slope stabilization, in the past, they may involve more concrete cement. But now we look for a way that can use less cement, more natural materials, and can reduce the carbon footprint by about 50%. And at the same time that we can cut less trees and integrate more greenery. For instance, through these slope stabilization works, every year we are going to increase about 300,000 more trees and shrubs through the integration with the slopes. So in short, we are working on this for decades, and we are going to continue the works to make our city safe, healthy, and livable for all people, no matter they are rich and not so rich. At the same time that we make the best use of the public fund so that we can create green jobs, at the same time to ensure that the infrastructure and public works integrate with the ideas like biodiversity, climate resilience, so that we can make the city even better and greener, more greenery and more biodiversity in the works.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I just get a quick time check. Is anyone in charge here with the time? Just conscious of... We're just going freestyle here. Time to wrap it up? Okay, we got the signal. So join me in thanking our presenters here from Oslo and Hong Kong, Vancouver. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you.
Sir. Yeah.